What's up everyone, Subterranean here, and today we're going to learn how to make this bass. This is a resampled sort of Rhys bass that was inspired by glitch hop artists like KOAN Sound, but you can also use this bass in many other electronic genres like dubstep and drum and bass. So let's get started on making this bass, and seeing how this is a resampled sound, we're going to need an original sound to throw into our sampler and then create this. For this sound, what I did was I took the drum and bass sound that we made in Massive and I bounced it down to an audio format for us to put into sampler. Here's the audio file that I bounced down. In the description box below, we'll have a link where you can download this Ableton project file, and this audio clip will be packed into the project file too, so if you don't have Massive, you'll still be able to create this bass. For those who do have Massive, I'd suggest going back and watching my previous drum and bass video if you haven't seen it yet. And when you're done making that sound, what you're going to want to do before you bounce it down is you're going to want to go into Massive, and you'll want to set the 5th LFO to be on sync so it'll be playing at a consistent speed, and you want the ratio to be set at 1:2. You'll also want to play a C note on the 2nd octave, so it sounds like that, and you're going to want to set your beats per minute to 100. I'm just going to draw this note out and then freeze it again, just to give anybody who hasn't resampled and done stuff like this before an idea of how to do it. So we're just going to draw this note out. Want it to be about this length right here, from 1 to 1.3. And then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to right click on this track, click on freeze, and then after that you would right click again and then press flatten. And there you go. Now you have your bass bounced down to an audio file. But let's just get rid of this for now because we're just going to be using this audio file that I made previously. And now we're going to drag on a new instance of sampler. And let's drag our sample into the sampler. Now the sampler isn't doing anything particularly special right now. We've just got the sample in, and it's playing at a different speed and a different pitch whenever we press a different note. And one problem we have right now is that the sample actually ends. We want this sample to play until we let go of a note. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to find a part of the sample that I really like, a part that I think would work really well for a Rhys, and I'm going to loop that. So I'm going to go to the sample start panel right here, and I'm just going to sort of drag through it, see if I can find a good spot. I think maybe somewhere around here would be good. It gets nice and gritty. Maybe about 3, 7, 8, 57. And that'll actually be a really good place to start the sample at. It's got this nice sort of rise up with the filter. I'm going to drag through the sample end panel because I don't want this little portion of nothing going on. I think I'm going to do 49700. And there we go. A pretty small sample, but we're going to fix that by looping it. And for something a little bit different here, I'm going to go to the sustain mode. This is where you can loop your samples. And I'm actually going to click on the loop back and forth button right here. Basically what this is going to do is, instead of looping the sample by playing it over and over again, it's going to play the sample one time forward, then it'll play it in reverse, and it'll just keep playing it forwards and backwards until you let go of the note. I find that this looping method works really well for Rhys basses. It can create some very interesting sounds, but I don't like how it's going back through to the beginning of the sample. So, like I did with my sample start panel, I'm going to do the same thing and scroll through, see if I can find a good place for the loop to start. I'm thinking about 33131. I like that a lot. And we'll have the loop end at maybe 49700. There's a very small pop whenever the sample loops again, but it's not very audible, and when we add a lot of processing to the bass, it's not going to matter. If you're setting your loop start and end yourself, and you're not going by these exact directions, and you notice that you're getting a really bad pop sound, I would suggest right-clicking on the loop start and end markers, and then clicking on snap marker. That'll snap things into place to make them sound more smooth. Now we're done with the sample panel on our sampler. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to the pitch oscillator panel. Just click on that. And one thing that I really like about Ableton Sampler is it has this very unique sort of FM synthesis module that you don't get in a lot of samplers, and it can make some very interesting and gritty sounds. So to do that, we're going to turn on the mod oscillator. We'll just click on the oscillator button right here, and we're going to leave it on FM mode because we want frequency modulation. Let's go to the sustain and turn it all the way up so our FM sound doesn't decay. And now I'm going to tweak with the coarse and the volume, and I'm going to see if we get a good sound. I think I'll leave the type on sign because from my experience, that seems to work the best with most samples. I like the sort of grit that we get at minus 23 dB, but it's a little bit too high pitched, so let's turn down the coarse. 0.25 works really well. You can just hear a nice, really heavy sound come in there. Now let's go over to the Filter Global tab. Just click on that. We're going to go over to our filter and we're going to change it to be a notch filter. Notch filters work really well for Rhys basses. And we're going to set the resonance all the way up at 125%. A little bit more of a smooth sound. And instead of modulating the filter with an LFO, what we're going to do instead is we're just going to take the filter frequency and we'll just modulate it ourselves with automation. This might be a little bit more monotonous, but I prefer doing this as it gives you a lot more control over the sound and you can make some really crazy movements that sound great this way. And you can have it go as subtle or as severe as you'd like because you're modulating it yourself by hand. Here's what I got from dragging in some automation curves just at random. They're much too slow, but you can tell that we're getting a pretty cool sound. This video wasn't just focused on making the sound itself. I'd go through and make a much nicer pattern, but this is just as a demonstration. Let's do something a little bit more speedy right here. There we go. Now we're going to go down to our shaper. This is a nice little distortion unit that's built into Sampler. Let's set the type to sine, and we're going to tweak with the amount, see if we get a nice sound. Don't want it too high or else it just becomes sort of a distorted mess. I think we'll go with 22. There's just a small difference, but I like the difference that it makes. This is without the shaper. And this is with the shaper. Definitely more crisp. So let's just go over to MIDI. And the only thing we're going to do here is we're going to change the pitch bend range to +12. This is all up to personal preference, and it kind of depends on what patterns and what tracks you're making, but I like having it at +12 or higher, so you can do some crazy pitch modulations, have the Rhys go up and down rapidly, sort of like this. Patterns like that work really well for Rhys's, and they work really well in this sort of KOAN Sound style glitch hop. And now we're done with the sampler. We're going to throw on a lot of audio effects now. And the first one we're going to throw on is going to be an instance of EQ8. We're going to be using EQ8 a couple of times, in fact, so be ready for that. We're going to take our second band, and we're going to set the frequency to be at 232 Hz, and we'll turn the gain all the way down. This is what we're going to do for most of these instances of EQ8. We're going to take out a lot of frequencies so they don't get too resonant and too distorted. When you're working with highly distorted basses like this is a really good thing to do because you don't want a lot of muddiness and a lot of resonant tones that just become nasty and unpleasant to listen to. And let's tighten up that Q a good bit. We'll go with 5.02. Now let's go to band 3. We'll set this to be probably about 2.04 kilohertz. So let's do 2040. And once again, we'll take the gain and we'll put it all the way down at -15 decibels. And let's tighten up the Q again. We'll go with 3.92. Sounds a little bit stuffy now, but it's going to work a lot better once we add more distortion. Now band 4, this is the one that's on a high shelf by default. Let's set the frequency to be at 4.65 kilohertz, so we'll go with 4650. And let's turn up the gain just a little bit. Maybe 2.11. Yep, that's pretty good, and we don't need to tweak with the Q right now. It's good where it is. And now we'll go to band 5. Let's just turn that on. We'll set this to 534 hertz. We'll turn the gain down again, all the way down to minus 15 decibels. And we'll tighten up the Q once again. 5.02, that'll work good. Now let's throw on an instance of overdrive. For most of this video, I'm going to be using Ableton stock effects. We're only going to have 2 third-party plugins later on, and they're both free, so don't worry about buying any VSTs, because basically everything here can be done completely free as long as you've got Ableton. Let's take our little bandpass right here in overdrive, and let's tweak the frequency of it just a little bit. 1.10 kilohertz should be good, and we'll increase the resonance. I like it all the way at 9.00. Now let's scale back the drive. 19% will be good. Let's also scale back the tone just a little bit. 40% will work. Let's turn the dynamics all the way down, and let's tweak with the dry wet, see if we get a sound that we like. I think we'll just go with 100%. The overdrive, again, doesn't make a huge difference, but I think the difference that it does make with the sound is an improvement. Without overdrive, and then with. Now we're going to throw on our first third-party VST. We're going to go with Camel Crusher, and once again, this is completely free, and it can be used on Windows and Mac. And the other third-party plugin that I have, which I'm going to be using as the last effect for this bass, is also free, and it can be used on Mac or Windows. This is a really great distortion plugin, and I use it a lot. So let's just initialize the preset. We'll click on our little preset picker right here, and then we'll click on Clear Preset, so we have a blank slate to work with. Let's turn on our distortion, and let's turn the tube up a little bit. Let's also turn the mech up. Tweak with that just a little. You could probably spend all day here just making very subtle tweaks, but I think the settings I have right here are good enough. But we've still got some sort of muddy frequencies going on, so time for another EQ8. And for our second band, we're going to set this to be at 601 hertz, and we're going to turn the gain all the way down. And let's tighten up that Q. Actually, not too much. How about 1.94? Nice. Now band 3. We'll go with 2.71 kilohertz, so 2710. And we'll decrease that all the way down. And tighten that up. 1.34 Q, that'll be good. Now for band 4, the high shelf. We're going to increase the high frequencies quite a bit here. But first, let's set this back just a little bit. We'll do 4.65. And let's turn the gain up now. Oh, about maybe 5.58. Works for me. And now we're done with EQ8. That's the last time we're going to use it. Only 2 times, which might seem a little bit odd that we're using 2 instances of EQ8 anyway. But when you get into these very heavily processed, resampled basses, you're going to be doing that quite a bit. So now we're going to throw on an instance of reverb. Like always, we'll turn off our chorus and turn on our low cut and leave the high cut on. And let's make a curve maybe like this. We'll turn down the dry wet a significant amount. We don't want very much of it. I think 13% is just fine. And we'll also turn down the decay quite a bit. Somewhere in the milliseconds. 344 milliseconds. Yep, that'll do well. And seeing how we're using a very small amount of reverb, you may have guessed that we're going to throw on some compression next. And that's true, we're going to throw on some multiband dynamics with the OTT preset. But before we do that, there's one last thing we actually need to do with the EQ. You can see that when the sound is going through the EQ and then into the reverb, it's clipping and it's kind of dirty and not in a good way with this type of music. So let's turn the gain down to minus 12 decibels, all the way down. Just a small tweak, but I think it works better. So now we're going to throw on OTT. So just go to multiband dynamics and then go for the OTT preset. And we're going to make a couple tweaks to this preset because it already sounds great, but we could make it suit this sound a little bit more. So I think we'll start with the high output level. We'll set that a little bit higher. We'll do 11.3 decibels. We'll leave the mid output the same, and we'll turn down the low output a bit. We'll go for 6.40 decibels. Now I'm going to take both of these sliders here, the high and mid ones, and I'm going to tweak them just a bit. And now we're done with the multiband dynamics effect. We've only got one more effect to add on, and it's going to be the third-party free plugin Clip Shifter. And all we're going to do here is we're going to take the in-gain and we'll increase it just a little bit to add a little bit more grit and distortion to the sound. Not too much. I'm thinking 3.38 decibels. Let's actually increase the highs in the OTT a little bit more. Let's work on those a little bit more right here. The mids too, just a very slight tweak. And there we have our sound. One small thing that I'd like to add before I end this video, I saved this for the end because this doesn't have much to do with the sound at all, it's just more of a personal preference thing. But one thing you might want to do when you're making bass lines for these sort of Rhys basses specifically is you'll want to go over to the pitch tab and you're going to want to turn the glide on so you get that nice gliding notes effect. I didn't really use it in any of my patterns, I used the pitch bend instead, but both methods for controlling the pitch work really well. So, to activate that, you'll want to be under the Pitch Oscillator tab. You'll want to turn Glide on, set it to Glide, and let's turn up the time a bit. This is all up to preference, but I like it at 806 milliseconds for something nice and heavy. And there you go. I've seen some places where people have had problems trying to find the portamento or glide features in Sampler. A lot of people are confused and they can't really find it because it's buried under here. So I just wanted to shed some light on that. So that was my tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Please like this video and leave a comment as it really helps us out. And please subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.